So the next step in the design of our engine is to add an onboard computer to the engine. We want to do this so that while the engine's running, we can take efficiency readings by hooking up sensors to the computer, and that's really the next step in our engine. But first, what we wanted to do is we wanted to actually integrate a computer onto the engine. So what we're doing is we're going to be replacing this switch panel, this mechanical switch panel that switches our fuel pump, oil pump, air start, and spark plug. And we're going to be replacing that with this touchscreen. So this touchscreen is going to be wired into a Raspberry Pi. Now what a Raspberry Pi is an itty bitty, teeny tiny little computer, but it has a lot of power. And I just got our Raspberry Pi back from computer science, and what they did for me was they wrote a code that displays buttons on the touchscreen that essentially just really all it does is replace this for now. Now that's what we're looking to get done today, is to just replace the switch panel with the touchscreen, and in the future we can have controls of the engine automated through the Pi, as well as we can wire sensors to the Pi and get efficiency readings and so forth. So to actually wire the Raspberry Pi to the engine, to be able to control the motors and starters on the engine, we had to come up with a different wiring scheme than what we had previously. This is because all of the oil pump and the fuel pump and the solenoids and spark plugs and everything run on 12 volt DC power. Now the Raspberry Pi can't produce 12 volt power. It can only give out 3.3 volts from its GPIO ports. So we had to come up with a wiring configuration that would be able to take the 3.3 volts and step it up to 12 volts without damaging the Pi in the process. So this is what we've come up with. It's mostly done. The only thing left to actually add onto it is the fuse panel and the actual wires from the Pi to the rest of the wiring system. But the fuse panel will go here, and you can see these will get wired to the fuse panel, as well as these, as well as the grounds. So what we're going to do now is we're actually going to finish installing this, and then we'll give you a quick run through on how this little wiring works, and then we'll actually continue these wires on up through into here over to where the Raspberry Pi will be. Now this is just the old wiring system we had that went from the switch panel to everything else. Most of this will be gone. We will use some of these wires because they are already routed in the correct spot from here over to where the Pi will be. So we'll use some of these wires to actually take the 3.3 volts from the Pi to our input wires here. So now that we've actually finished putting our fuse panel in and this section of wiring is wired up, we're actually going to work on sifting through the old wiring harness, and we're going to take some of these wires, we're actually going to connect them to the new wiring harness so that our wires are now run from here all the way up through the engine to the other side to the control panel where our touchscreen and Raspberry Pi are going to be mounted. Now you can see that we've got the wires run now for the Pi to actually talk to the rest of the wiring system. Now we have to get power to the Pi. Now the Pi is powered off of a 5 volt 3 amp USB-C port. Well, we need to get 12 volt power to 5 volt USB-C. So actually we bought this really convenient adapter that just takes 12 volt DC in and has a convenient USB-C on it. So what we're going to do is we actually have a power and ground wire already run from the previous switch panel. So what we're going to do is we're going to hook this up to our existing fuse box. And then this will be mounted inside the case along with the Pi and the touchscreen. So now that the wires are actually connected to our new wiring harness to control the engine from the Raspberry Pi, we see that the wires we connected actually come out over here and connect to the existing switch panel. So what we're going to do is we're going to remove the existing switch panel, and that's going to allow us to then spec up a mount so we can 3D print a mount to put the touchscreen in here and have the Pi sitting in the back of the switch panel as well. So now we got our 12 volt to 5 volt USB-C wired up. We've also flipped on our thermal circuit breaker, so the fuse panel should be getting power. So we're just going to make sure that this actually gives the Pi the power required. So when we plug this in, the Pi should turn on. And the fans come on, and there we go. We can see the screen is starting to boot up.